It's rare for a star to be murdered. It's even rarer when the star is someone who's had as much influence on music, art, and culture as John Lennon. The musician, widely considered one of the greatest songwriters of all time, rose to fame as a member of the Beatles. The Beatles were artists who experimented with music, fashion, drugs, and religion in a way that had far-reaching effects. Your favorite band wouldn't be able to do half the things they're able to do in 2024 if it hadn't been for the way the Beatles had shaken up the world in the 1960s. So, when Lennon was brutally killed on the steps outside his home in New York, an entire generation was stunned. How did it happen? Who would do such a thing? And why? George Harrison, a former bandmate of John, said, "After all we went through together, I had and still have great love and respect for him. I'm shocked and stunned." Ringo Starr and his wife Barbara Bach rushed to be with John's wife Yoko Ono after hearing the news. Lennon's former bandmate Paul McCartney would later reveal that Lennon once pondered how he would be remembered after he was gone. McCartney recalled on an episode of his podcast in 2023, "I remember him saying to me, 'Paul, I worry about how people are going to remember me when I die.' And it kind of shocked me. I said, 'Okay, hold on. Just hold it right there. People are going to think you were great. You've already done enough work to demonstrate that.'" What was particularly tragic about Lennon's death was that the star had just begun his return to the music business after a 5-year hiatus. During the years leading up to his murder, Lennon had been in the spotlight for his political and personal beliefs. He was also the target of a deportation effort from the Nixon administration because the president felt Lennon's actions threatened his re-election efforts. The deportation threat hung on an old marijuana charge. At the same time, the FBI also had Lennon as a target under FBI Director John Edgar Hoover. Lennon was under surveillance primarily for his anti-war activities. But in 1976, his music contracts with EMI and the Beatles had finally dissolved, meaning Lennon had no longer any commitments to a record company. He was free, and for a time, he stepped away from show business. He took care of his new son, Sean, who had arrived in the autumn of 1975. Lennon finally got his green card, which allowed him to stay in the United States as a permanent resident. And since he could now come and go as he pleased, he left the US and traveled to Tokyo to visit his wife's family. In the summer of 1980, as Sean turned 5, Lennon began to write songs again and spent time in Bermuda working on new music. With his creative juices flowing, John had written enough songs for 2 new albums. He released a single which went on to be a hit. Beatles fans were happy to see their hero back in the charts, but the rest of his music wouldn't be published until after his death. On December 8th, the day he was killed, John and Yoko took part in a photo shoot for Rolling Stone magazine at their apartment at the Dakota Building just across from New York Central Park. Lennon and Ono then gave an interview to San Francisco DJ Dave Sholin. In the chat, Lennon claimed that he was looking forward to playing his new music live, having never properly toured as a solo artist. "I'm so hungry for making records because of the way I feel," John told the DJ and his associates. "I want to make some records before I tour, so I'd like to make at least one more album before actually making that decision." After their interview, the couple left the Dakota around 5 p.m. They were headed for the Hit Factory, a studio situated across town. As the couple exited their home, they walked through the usual gaggle of fans that had started to congregate around the building in the Upper West Side of the city ever since Lennon had started to become a public figure again. One of the fans offered a copy of the new album, Double Fantasy, and Lennon signed the sleeve. That fan was Mark David Chapman. Mark Chapman was born in Texas, but in 1980 he lived in Hawaii with his wife Gloria. He'd been a Beatles fan as a teenager, but as a born-again Christian, was offended when John Lennon was quoted in 1966 saying that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. His hatred toward the musician intensified once John started to appear in the media again in 1980. Chapman couldn't understand that the man who preached "all you need is love" was now living as a millionaire. Chapman first traveled to New York City in October 1980, intending to murder John with a revolver, but something changed his mind, and he returned home. When Chapman traveled to New York again on the 6th of December with the same gun, nothing would prevent him from carrying out his terrible mission this time. For most of that fateful day, Mark Chapman joined the Beatles obsessives hanging outside the Dakota Building, waiting for a glimpse of their hero. He missed Lennon arriving at the apartment early in the morning, but had a chance later to see John's son Sean turn up with his nanny. When Lennon signed Chapman's album as he left the building that evening, the assassin was caught up in the excitement of meeting a Beatle. But later in the evening, his mood changed. At about 10:50 p.m., John Lennon and Yoko Ono returned to the Dakota in their limousine after a successful mixing session of Yoko's new single, Walking on Thin Ice. The couple walked across the pavement and through the archway to the building's entrance. Lennon turned when he heard someone calling his name, at which point Mark Chapman fired 5 bullets from his revolver into Lennon's back. The bullets were hollow point, meaning they exploded into shrapnel once they hit their target. As Lennon stumbled into the entrance of the Dakota, the doorman heard the commotion and dashed to help. New York police officers quickly arrived on the scene. One of them, Officer James Moran, tried to get a response from the fallen figure asking, "Are you John Lennon?" Lennon reportedly responded, "Yes." After the shooting, Mark David Chapman removed his coat and stood under a lamp reading The Catcher in the Rye, where the doorman Jose Perdomo found him. When an anguished and confused Jose asked, "Do you know what you've just done?" Chapman replied calmly, "Yes, I just shot John Lennon." Lennon was no longer breathing when he arrived at the Roosevelt Hospital 10 minutes later, and he had no pulse. Medics battled for nearly 20 minutes to resuscitate him, but the bullets had shredded his body, and the Beatle died in the emergency room. The coroner's report said that Lennon had lost more than 80% of his blood supply. According to the autopsy, 2 bullets struck Lennon's left lung before exiting his chest. One bullet that entered through his shoulder hit his left arm bone, while the other punctured his lung before becoming lodged in his neck. Yoko Ono was devastated. "When John fell right beside me, I felt like we were in a guerrilla war, not knowing who or where the enemy was," Ono later wrote. Witnesses have claimed that Lennon's last words were, "I'm shot," said just moments before the former Beatle collapsed. However, his last words to his widow were much sweeter. Yoko Ono has shared that on the way home from the studio that fateful night, she had suggested grabbing dinner before returning home. But Lennon replied, "No, let's go home because I want to see Sean before he goes to sleep." Mark Chapman was interviewed for hundreds of hours by court-appointed psychiatrists on behalf of defense and prosecution lawyers. The defense concluded that Chapman was a paranoid schizophrenic, while the prosecution claimed that he was competent to stand trial. Chapman himself decided to plead guilty to the murder, and he was sentenced to 20 years to life. In 2020, Chapman told the parole board that the killing was motivated by jealousy. "My thinking was, he has all of this money, lives in this beautiful apartment, and he's into music representing a more cautious lifestyle, a more giving lifestyle," he told the board. "It made me angry and jealous compared to the way I was living at the time. There was jealousy in there." He added, "I assassinated him because he was very, very, very famous, and that's the only reason." Chapman is eligible for parole again this year for the 13th time. He'll be 69 years old. There was no funeral for John Lennon, just a private cremation. But a silent vigil was also held in Lennon's honor a week after his death. On December 15, 1980, Yoko Ono invited the public to participate in the vigil from wherever they were at the time. Around 100,000 people turned up to honor John in Central Park. Another 2,000 gathered in Chicago, and a memorial concert for 30,000 was held in Lennon's hometown of Liverpool, England. Lennon's ashes were scattered in Central Park, where there now lies a memorial called Strawberry Fields. John Lennon was survived by his wife, Yoko Ono, and 2 sons, Julian and Sean Lennon. He left an immeasurable mark on the world, both in life and death. And with that, we've come to an end. That's it for today. Comment down below on your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest videos. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.